Just very quickly, you describe in your book also that how modernism generally and modern architecture particularly has led to the idea of the ongoing development of style and of society having got to be directed at some kind of aim through architectural renewal.
I take the development of architectural modernism as an application of a particular kind of fallacy, which is expressed already in the works of Hegel, in Hegel's philosophy of history, but which I think is something much broader, which is, I call it the moving spirit fallacy, the idea that humanity is caught up in a single linear movement, always taking it in one direction. And that direction is the direction that we ought to go because it's always leading to greater freedom, greater competence, and so on. Of course, it's absolutely true that in the sciences and in technology, we have for many hundreds of years been moving in that direction. But it's a great fallacy to think that the kind of dynamic that is exemplified by science can be exemplified in something humane, like architecture. That the knowledge required to build properly is knowledge that's as easily lost as won. And I think we lost it. And this goes back to that born-free fallacy as well. It's not just in education generally that you need discipline. In art, in particular, you need discipline. The great towns and cities that were built in Europe were the legacy of a very specific discipline, the discipline of the classical orders and the Gothic that preceded them, in which architects learned to do things like draw the shadow of the sunlight on a column. They learnt how different parts of a building fit together and how the junctions of the building have to be moulded in a very complex way in order that the light inhabits the junctions and makes the thing look serene. This is the sort of discipline that was cast away by Gropius and Le Corbusier and
founders of modernism in architecture.
There were great modernists. I don't want to dismiss them, but they cast away that discipline, saying that we didn't need that anymore. It was enough to have the pure line and understand the pure line.
And why was that? Why was that utopian? Why was that an unscrupulous optimism?
Well, I'm not saying that. This then became a movement. I'm not saying that, although Gropius was clearly quite bonkers, I'm not saying that he was a utopian. But out of that grew this standard propaganda which inhabits the schools of architecture, which says that we can't go back to that because that was then and now is now. We must go on always to something newer. And you get the sort of the Rem Koolhaas version of the architect. The architect is the great remaker of the environment, the person who's finding a yet newer way for us to be together in a city. And here it is, and it all turns out to be gadgets that could have been fitted into a modern kitchen, but it amplified so that they obliterate a part of Rotterdam. People may be happy with this, but whether they are or not, they've never been consulted.
Mr. van Rossem?
I think that modernism, as an intellectual movement, has been a terrible thing for all art, not only architecture, but also painting and music. Because modernism in its let's say, avant-garde fallacy, that's the idea that you have to think up something. As soon as something is established, you have to think up something new. And art is not something that is nice or gives you whatever, a warm feeling. Art is something that makes you unhappy in a sense, that creates an idea of I don't feel really good or in harmony with the world. It has to make you feel inharmonious in a way. So it created painting that nobody is particularly interested in, except for musea. It created music that nobody wants to listen to, and it created buildings that nobody wants to live in, and that's certainly true. I do think that modernism was a dead end. It was also intellectually unavoidable that when people started really serious started thinking really in a really serious way about art, modernism in a way was unavoidable. But now we know that it's a dead end. It took us about 100 years to find out that it's a complete dead end. And I think when you look at architecture in the Netherlands, you see there's a kind of traditionalist movement. Think of men like Creer and others, and people tend to be very critical of these anti-modernist architects, but it's quite evident that that's the future of architecture, and not Mr. Koolhaas, who builds great buildings in Peking, but I mean, it's of course, I mean...
Maybe not all people in the audience know who Von Trier is. Maybe you can just quickly explain what
the name is Creer. He's a Luxembourger.
Yeah, sorry.
An architect from Luxembourg who builds traditional houses, the kind of houses that people actually want to live in, because as soon as he has built one of his projects, I mean, people are really enthusiastic about it.
It's
people
a new urbanism movement.
People want to live in the kind of houses that they built in the 20s and in the 30s. I don't know what an erker is in English, but that's what people want.
How do you view this movement of going back to traditional architecture?
Yes, I'm all in favour of the new urbanism, and I know Leon Creer quite well, and what he does, it's absolutely right. It's very popular. It's hated bitterly by architects, and there's a very good reason for this, because if you build, as Creer recommends, you don't make huge profits. Whereas if you build in the Koolhaas way, you can make 2 million on every building and have a repair contract, which will bring in 500,000 a year.
Right. So it's very profitable to be utopian. That's perhaps a nice conclusion.